There we go. Okay. So the Dinosaurs The Torah approach. This is three parts to it. We'll go through the first part now. Mitzvah Hashem over the next few weeks. Hopefully get to the other two approaches. A lot of what we're going to say is based on, and I found in other places. Some things are my own understandings of what could be. So when people talk about dinosaurs, one of the first things they talk about is a famous Medrash Tehillim. Medrash brings on the pasuk, "She'eni mipi aryeh umikarnei reimi." David HaMelech is calling to Hashem, "Save me from the lion, save me from the karnei reimim, the horns of the reimim." What are we talking about? So Amar Rav Huna bar Idi, v'shayach shehaya David royas atzoy. When David HaMelech was a shepherd, taking care of the sheep, halach umatzas haraim yoshin b'midbar. He saw a reim sleeping in the midbar. Vayasover shuhar. He thought it was a mountain. He went upon it and he was shepherding. The Medrash doesn't clearly say he went up together with the sheep, but it says he went up and he was roya. So apparently the mountain was big enough, the animal was big enough for David HaMelech to go onto the mountain, so to speak, onto the re'im, and continue shepherding with his sheep. Ninar ha're'im, and the re'im woke up, v'amad, and got up. V'haya David rachov alav, and David was riding on it. V'haya magia ad l'shamayim, which the understanding is as it lifted its head from the ground. So David was more towards the front of his head, and as it lifted upwards, he went higher and higher till he got to the heavens, and it was a very scary thing. Ba'isa Shah Amar David, at that moment David HaMelech said, Imata merideini min ha're'im hazeh eibishter, if you're going to get me down from this re'im safe and sound, ani boina lecha heichol shel meya amma, I'll build a heichol, a Beis Hamikdash with a chamber of 100 amos tall. Kikeren ha're'im hazeh. Kikeren ha're'im hazeh means like the size of this horn. This horn is 100 amos. What does that mean? So the Medrash says two opinions. Yesh eimim le'orkei medadai, the length of the horn was 100 amos. The yesh eimim le'rachbei medadai, which would mean that the width is 100 amos, so the length would be so much longer. Because of every horn, the length is obviously a lot longer than the width. So if the width is 100 amos, you could just imagine how long the length of the horn would be. After this tefillah, the Eibishter, right away, Zimin lo Aryeh Echad, a lion came. Kaven Shara Ha're'emes Ha'aryeh, when the lion saw when the Re'em saw the Aryeh, Nisyari Mimenu, he was afraid of the lion, V'rovatzloi, and he bowed down and he settled down, because the lion is the king, even though the lion is tiny. And of course, this picture is Tamak HaChainik, but even according to the Medrash, it's obviously a huge difference. And how can they be afraid of this small little lion? Yet, since the Re'em knows that the Eibishter made the lion the Melech, he was therefore afraid of him. V'yorad David la'aretz, and as a result, David was able to go down off the Re'em onto the ground. Now, when he got to the ground, now he has a new tzara. The Kavan Shara David is Ha'ari, and he's the lion's in front of him. He davened to Hashem again, and the Kach Nemar, that's the pasuk we started off with. Hoshiyeni mipi aryeh keshem shanisani mikarni re'emi. He says, Hashem, you just saved me from the re'emi, now please save me from the lion. But this is a famous medrash which is brought down about this creature called re'em and its huge dimensions of this re'em. Of course, the question is, as far as we've seen, we look around the world and we haven't found a re'em. Is it hiding somewhere in the Amazon jungle? According to the heist that we said just now, will we be able to see it if we fly over it? Hard to say that there's an animal of those dimensions that still exists somewhere on the globe right now. Everything Hashem can do anything, but for anyone to try to say that, it'll be a very weak argument. Most people won't agree that there's something like that today in the world of those sizes. But who knows? We'll get to that later. To assume that it's literal and the sizes that he says, l'chayra, we don't know of such things, and I think it's very fair to say that as far as that it doesn't exist today in the world around us. So the question is, what is the aim? And of course, many people say maybe it's the dinosaur. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the dinosaurs, or what people know, a little bit of what we know. And there's a lot of science about dinosaurs and different things, so we'll go through a basic overview. In the year Tuf Beis, Hey Allah from Tuf Beis, so that's 382 years ago, a person by the name of Robert Plot, this officially is a painting of him, is credited with discovering the first dinosaur bone. He was in England, but he just found this huge bone, he didn't know what it was. So his guess was it was a giant human. In those times, people believed in giants, which we know that giants existed also in the ancient past. But here it's basically a bone that was found from a giant because it was a bone that he couldn't recognize. Of all the kinds of bones that he was familiar with, he was some kind of scientist. This bone didn't make sense to him. So therefore, he recognized the bone. He said it was something different. And the assumption is that that's the first, and again, in the science world, that's the assumption. In that year, 382 years ago, was the first bone, but at that point, they still had no clue for what it was. Later on, more discoveries were made. We're in America. In America, the assumption is that the first dinosaur bone was discovered in the year Taf Reish Yud Dalet. That's 200 years later. Now, at the time of Taf Nun Beis, there was America was being developed, but it was a very small country. It was small colonies at the time, and slowly but surely became bigger and bigger. Taf Reish Yud Dalet already, America was already a country for itself, an up and coming country, one of the greater countries. And indeed, they say that there was an explorer, Ferdinand Hayden, that was exploring the upper Missouri River, and he found bones over here in America. So that made people realize that maybe America has these bones also, and more or less at this time, people started coming up with these ideas that maybe these bones indeed existed to some kind of ancient creatures. Afterwards, what happened was there was what's called the Bone Wars, or also known as the Great Dinosaur Rush. There were two scientists, Edward Drinker Cope, and Othniel Charles Marsh. Both of these people were both diggers, and they had a lot of connections, and they were scientists, and they were the fancy word of theirs, paleontologists, which is, I forget if it's specifically a scientist for dinosaurs or for ancient bones, I forget. But basically, they both were searching all over America for bones, and there was a lot of competition between them. And as a result, they started beschmutzing each other in the media, in the newspapers of the times, saying that the other one is a fraud, he's making things up, and each one was saying bad things about the other one. They were trying to actually destroy the other people's finds. But in these 20 years, from Taf Reish Lamed to Taf Reish Nun, so that's 20 years, that's going back now also a little bit more than 200 years ago. This is less. This would be 100 and 200 actually after the first one, but for us, this is already 140, 130 years ago. And this is where they basically, a big part of the bones that are officially found that we know of today were found at this time, but as we'll see later, there's more discoveries finding. They're finding all these bones, and this is when they started making, like I said, it's called, we mentioned the bone wars and the dinosaur rush. And as I weiter, like we said, please don't sit over there. And this continues out that there's constantly people discovering and finding more. Don't touch the stables. So they're constantly looking for bones, and there's discoveries, and officially, according to scientists, every year they find officially approximately 50 new species. That's what they claim, and we'll explain later what their claims are, how they get to those claims, what those things mean. But the discoveries continue. The scientists are constantly digging and always finding whenever there's a drought, whenever there's a lack of rain, so rivers go down. I think a few years ago, even in Iowa or the Mississippi River, somewhere around here, there was like a bone that was found that in this area that they thought it may be a dinosaur bone. But basically, they're constantly searching for more and more. So there's definitely bones that are being found. As far as we know, these bones do not match with any of the animals that we're familiar with today. And therefore, we have a question, what are these bones? And another two questions that are asked are, how old are these bones? And we'll discuss later what the age of these bones are. And the other question is, where did they go? Whichever these bones, whatever animals they were, where are they today? So that's what they're breaking it up into three shiurim is going to be. This shiur Mitzvah Shem will focus on the first question: what are they exactly? These bones that are being found, and then the next two shiurim will talk about the other two questions. So, what are they? So there's a Rambam in Hilchos Tumas Meis Parakes which says, if someone finds a Eve Mitzuyanis, he finds a stone with a sign on it, like some kind of cement or plaster on top of the stone. Tachteha Tami. You should know that underneath it, it's Tami, and this is because it's probably a tombstone. It's part of a caver, and it can't be there. And there was a sim that was made in the past. There wasn't proper monuments, tombstones for graves. That was a sim. Hayu Shtayim. He finds two stones together. Im yeshid beinayim, if there's this plaster in between them, beinayim tummy. That was a simon that the grave was underneath, between the two stones, between his tummy. However, the Rambam continues, Im ein sid beinayim el al rashayim. If you have the plaster on top of the two stones, not between them, Im yesh cheres beinayim, if there's clay between them, then you know that it's tahir. Why? She'ein zeh el abinyan, because it's just an old ancient room, that a building that was there. V'im ein cheres beinayin v'hayasid merudad al rasheid mikana is etzion v'tomei. The Rambam is telling us when people are searching for ancient graves, people might get excited. I found a grave, I found a simon, but sometimes the Rambam says, whoa, you're getting all excited. What you're seeing over here really is not necessarily a grave, it's just an ancient ruin of a building that used to be here. The reason why I'm bringing the Rambam is to point out when people are searching for things, a lot of times when you assume that you're going to find something, even if you find something which is not really what you're hoping to find, you're going to try to touch it as if it is. So a lot of these people that are searching are hoping to find these things, and that's why sometimes their searches might the conclusions, so to speak, might be not that they're trying to be dishonest, but it's they're being clouded by their decision from the Chatchila that they're going to be finding something that's connected to dinosaurs. But l'chayra, at the end of the day, if the people find all these bones, they find these skeletons of these dinosaurs. So l'chayra, it only makes sense that if you see a skeleton, it makes sense they're ready to put together what it looked on the outside and come to the maskana that this is a dinosaur. So l'chayra, what's wrong with that assumption? What's wrong with that assumption is that the majority of the bones, almost all the bones, are found as separate pieces. And imagine taking a whole bunch of random pieces without numbers and on your own deciding to reconstruct them. So you're imagining that if it's an animal, it must have similar simanim to animals today. It has to have a mouth, it has to have a stomach, it has to have feet, it has to have hands, and you're putting together, but really you can reconstruct them, so to speak, however you want. So it's not the pshat that they're finding complete skeletons. There's almost no complete skeletons found. Most of the skeletons are really half or a third, not even. And it's mostly individual bones. When they find an individual bone, they can sometimes, when I mentioned before, they're finding 50 new species a year. That means they find 50 bones, and each bone becomes a whole new species that they, based off the fact that they never saw a bone in this shape, they decide this must be the tooth, this must be an elbow, and from this they recreate a whole new thing. Now, they're not Stam Hakachinics. We can say it's Hakachinik. These are people that are scientists that really study the bodies of animals and all these things. So it's a very educated guess, but it's a guess. It's meaning they really don't have no idea. And there were many stories, as we'll soon talk, of making mistakes. But to clarify, on the one hand, it's not Yuklach that Islam making things up. On the other hand, they don't have a strong basis for what they're saying. A lot of it is assumptions of how to put together these bones. There's a story of Professor Velvo Green. He was not far from here in Rochester. That's where he was from. So he has a book, which is a very fascinating book about Torah and science and the Rebbe and other things. So he writes about one of his important moments in his life. He said, as a youngster, he would often go to the museum. He was fascinated by dinosaurs. So he would always go and watch things. And he noticed how, this is also a klal, if you ever go to a museum and you see a big skeleton of a dinosaur, you should know that half or maybe 2/3 or even more is really plaster, it's really fake. They're created from scratch. There's a number of real bones over there, but most of the bones there are made back in the back with a lab. And he went there and he would observe that, and he describes how he saw things, and it made so much sense. If you see these two bones, it makes sense to add another bone in between. Whatever he said, it makes a lot of sense. But he got friendly with them. And one time he asks the man that's there, why is the dinosaur green? And I'm making it a full picture and a full model, they make it green. So he looked at me a little strange, Green says, and he says, because dinosaurs are green. So I thought for a moment, I said, why? Now, he thought for a moment, he asks me, what color do you think they should be? And Professor Green says this conversation was a huge part in his life. And he responded, well, maybe they're pink, maybe blue, maybe yellow polka dots. Who knows? So the technician that was working got offended. He said, that's ridiculous. Whoever saw a yellow dinosaur? To which I obviously responded, whoever saw a green one. So it's a very important thing to realize that Professor Green is a very big fan of science. In his book, he says it over and over again. But he realizes that certain things in science make a lot of sense, and there's strong reasons to say so. But a lot of things they're pushed making things up because they have to make a picture. They have to give it a color, so they choose the color whatever color they choose. So that's important to realize. Some of their things that they're saying makes a lot of sense. Some of the things are just whatever. You have to give it a color, and that's it. So B'meila, another story to bring out this point, in 1999, it's a long time ago, but it's still, the National Geographic Society made a bold proclamation that they found a newly discovered feathered species of dinosaurs in China, and they had exclusive access to these prehistoric fossil, and after weeks of tests, they tested it for a number of weeks to figure out, and they gave it a new name, Arcaripator, whatever. The way it works is that all the names are always in Latin. That's a cloud. All scientists agree that any name that they want to give it, they give a name in their own language, and they translate it into Latin. That becomes the official language, or the name for all other languages. Because this was a new species. It wasn't stam. It was a link between dinosaurs and birds. One of the big shilas, as we'll talk later, as dinosaurs, birds are not kitzer. This was like a huge deal. They were so proud of themselves, and they published it in their magazine. A few weeks later, they had to make an embarrassing retraction, an apology, admitting that the whole thing was a fake. One of the largest scientific organizations in the world was tricked by a number of Chinese farmers who put together pieces from different animals, and they came up and they said, this is what it is. So this is a story that these stories don't happen all the time, to clarify. It's not like every day they're constantly making things up. But this story shows you that they can obviously make mistakes. There was weeks of testing, and they could still make mistakes, and until someone else came and challenged it. Most people wouldn't challenge it before. But I think, if I remember correctly, a certain scientist was very either jealous or couldn't handle it, so he started challenging it, and he started analyzing more until they got into the maskana. So again, the point is, there's a lot of speculation and maybe and could be about what these bones are. But again, the Pashtus, it's pretty much agreed that a lot of these bones are bones that are not what we are familiar with of skeletons of animals that we know of, or have the humans, and therefore they're trying to figure out what it is. So the question is, could they be right? Is it possible that the Torah Taka talks about maybe these bones are indeed dinosaurs? Is it possible that the Torah is saying such a thing? So Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer Yud Gimel, Perikut Gimel, he writes over there about the Nachash Hayaru Mikoil. He writes the Nachash was the Musay Kimin Gabla. Now to have a snake in the shape of a camel is very odd. So obviously the Nachash cannot be the dinosaur because the Nachash was a one-time creature and Hashem punished it and there was no Hemshech and there's tons of bones out there. But the point of bringing the Medrash is to show that maybe just like the Nachash was different in those times, other animals were also different in those times. Huh? The Nachash in the times of Gan Eden, the one that had the four legs and all that, the whole conversation with them. Yeah, I'm sorry, you're right. Of course, there's snakes today, but the snake the way it was then is obviously different. So the Mela, this part, the point of the Medrash is just to say that maybe animals have changed drastically, which we'll talk about more with Hashem the next year. Another question people want to know is, why doesn't Torah clearly talk about it, or does it talk about it clearly? So an answer that's suggested is that we have a rule, Torah is Milashon Hira, meaning Torah is not a history book. Torah is not coming to teach us history or zoology of all the ancient animals. Torah is giving us heroes and what to do in Avodas Hashem. And that is why you're not going to find in the Torah a kangaroo either, even though kangaroos definitely exist. So b'meila, this is one approach that people like to say, that who cares if the Torah doesn't mention dinosaurs? So what? Why does it have to mention dinosaurs? That's an answer that could be said, even though according to Drush, according to Kabbalah, everything is in Torah. Yet at the same time, even they agree it's not explicit in Torah. Obviously, it's a remez or a gematria. So just like you'll find kangaroos in Torah, maybe you can find somehow these creatures if they were indeed dinosaurs. However, there is another opinion which says that when the Torah says in the Chumash in the beginning of the creation, "Vayivra Elokim besataninim agdolim," the Eibusher created the taninim gdolim. Taninim is one of the hard words to translate. Tan can mean either a snake, or it can mean an alligator, it can mean a whale, it can mean other kind of sea monsters. But the pasuk says Hashem created the taninim agdolim. What are these taninim agdolim? So the Gemara says it means arzile de yama, these giant creatures that are found in the water. Now, what does this mean? So the Marsha explains as follows. Whatever yesh bayabasha, yesh kenegda bayam. That's a cloud. Whatever you find on land, you find also in the sea. Not obviously the exact same thing, but something similar to it. V'amin agadol beyeser bayabasha, who are the aim. Says the Marsha, the greatest creature on land is the aim. Al kain mistaber shaberi agdele beyeser bayam tanini magdelim him gam kemirim. So the word arzile is the Aramaic word for the aim. So basically, there's the aim of land and the aim of the sea. And that's the must be the greatest creature of the sea. The tanini magdelim are the aims of the sea. Asks the Maharsha, so why does the Torah say more details about specifying the huge creature of the ocean? Why doesn't it mention clearly the creatures of the Re'im on land? Because the Re'im is also not mentioned clearly in Chumash. So the Maharsha says, he says that maybe the creatures that are in the sea, these Ra'imim are tremendously greater than the ones on land. So the Pasuk says the greatest, largest creatures out there, but there are huge creatures also on land. So here we would basically say that Taninim would be a remiz somewhat to the Ra'im, which would be a huge creature, which maybe could be the dinosaurs that people are finding. Now, the big problem with this focus on the Ra'im is that most of the dinosaur bones that are found are smaller species. Even the largest one doesn't really fit to say that David HaMelech was able to go with a whole herd of a flock of sheep or goats and climb on its back and not notice. It's hard to say that. But even if you want to say that some of them, they haven't found it or they're out there, but definitely the majority of these bones are for smaller creatures. And the question is, one second, what are all those other species? What are these things?
You said before that, it said that he was raya, that he was just sitting on it as like a big...
and supervising from there, looking at them on the bottom.
Like a small mountain.
Okay, a small hill, that would mean. Sitting on the hill and looking down at the people, at the sheep. So, again, so the question is, all these dinosaur fossils, just to point out how many were found, also there's a lot of exaggeration. According to the numbers you see over here, it's found altogether from one to each area where it says over here is the colors obviously are very small. It's hard to see. So the bottom color, the whatever that is, brownish color, in those areas they found between 840 to 1,544 fossils. Each fossil, dinosaur fossil, means one individual bone. So even though there's a lot of spots that have found, but they're all very small numbers. So altogether, there's only thousands and thousands of bones, not tens of thousands and not millions of bones. That's just to be clear. People say millions of dinosaur bones have been found. That's an exaggeration, huge exaggeration. It's pretty much every single dinosaur bone that has been found officially, as far as I understand, has been documented. Where it is, people can buy them, some of them, but it's not like there's mamish millions all over the place. And the question that we're asking is, what about these other species? What are they? Are they indeed dinosaurs? Are they other creatures that were in the past? Or maybe there's something else? So again, to point this out, that when you're putting them together, so they have all these other species. But just like imagine a Lego thing, you can put together Legos in different ways. The same pieces of Legos can be reconstructed and make many different kind of things with them. So similar to these bones, you can put them together different ways. So even though they're saying there's so many species from all the bones, a lot of times, like I said, they find one bone and decide a whole new species. Maybe that bone is really part of a different one. So even if you accept that there are a whole bunch of different animals out there that we don't have today, Lav Daf gets the amount that they're saying. So what are they? So here there's a famous chiddush of the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, we can readily accept the possibility that Hashem created ready fossils, bones, or skeletons for reasons best known to him, just as he could create ready living organisms, a complete man, and such ready products as oil, coal, or diamonds without any evolutionary process. This is the Rebbe's huge chiddush, but the Rebbe explains it very clearly. The Rebbe says, maybe Hashem created these bones as is. And if someone's going to ask, but why would Hashem do such a thing? Why would Hashem create fossils? The Rebbe's answer is very simple. We cannot know the reason why Hashem chose this manner of creation. And the Rebbe says, whenever theory of creation you'll accept, the same question is, why did Hashem create an atom? Anything that Hashem created in the world is the same question. Why did he create stones and rocks and everything else out there in the world? Most of the things in the world, we have no idea why they're created. So the Rebbe says, it could very well be that Hashem created these fossils. So yes, we can say that these bones are true and they exist and are not hoaxes and all that. And you want to put together a puzzle like this or like that, you can. But they were never really creatures that existed. They were bones that Hashem created as is. Why? We have no idea. And to clarify, if you find a rock in the middle of a desert, you know what's created? There's many, many more rocks than there are. We don't know what the rocks give and all these different rocks out there and these mines that are there. Huh? Of course we do.
Yeah.
No, you
They
think
give minerals and pure
you have this munat tefillah in science that because they say they know everything, you think they know. A scientist ever told you that they know the reasons for every rock out there? You have no idea. You have no idea. You're just saying. You have no idea. You're just saying that. You have no clue. There's many things out there that we don't know. That things out there, they could be used. They could be somehow something could be done with them. We don't know what the reason for them is. We know what the rocks contribute to the ecosystem. We don't know those things. We don't know. I'm saying we don't know, but we don't know many things of what they're adding out there. What does the Mariana Trench add? Who knows? It's just a hole in the ocean. We don't know what these things are for. We just know that there's things out there that Hashem created. We don't know why they're there. So the Rebbe is not saying that it can't be animals, but the Rebbe is also saying that you don't know what it could be. All you know, you're seeing what you know. You're seeing that a bone, you know that it's a bone. That's all you know. Was it from a living creature? The assumption is probably yeah, but maybe not. We don't know what these things are for. Why Hashem created it? We don't know. So there's a misnagdim that learned this letter, and since they're misnagdim, so they have to teach everything in their approach. So they touched it. Oh, the Rebbe is trying to say that Hashem is creating these bones in order to fool us, to make us, to test us, and we should make these mistakes and whatever. The Rebbe doesn't say that. The Rebbe is not trying to say that Hashem is trying to trick us, and that's their approach. Hashem is trying to trick us, and they're like, no, Hashem doesn't trick us. The Rebbe never said that. The Rebbe is just saying we don't know. It's possible that Hashem created the fossils as is. That's all the Rebbe is saying, and the Rebbe is saying, and you're asking me why that makes no sense. The Rebbe agrees, and nothing makes sense. We have so many things out there, we don't know why Hashem created them either. We know Hashem created them. So the same thing could be over here. Again, we'll learn later that the Rebbe has other approaches as well. So that's regarding the other bones out there. What about the Re'im? The official original question we asked. The Re'im l'chayra is the Torah talks about the Re'im. The Medrash and the Psukim and Tehillim at least talks about the Re'im. The Gemara mentioned the Re'im of the Yam. So what about the Re'im? So there's another Gemara which the Marsha referenced. The Gemara says the story. Amar Rabba, Ledidi chazili urzila bar yoima. I once saw a 1-day-old Re'im. It was born that day. The Have kahar tover. It was as big as har tover. Har tover kama havi. How big was har tover? Arboin parsi, 40 parsois. A parsa is about 2 miles. 40 parsois would be 80 miles. Umoshcha de tzavri, so that's how big this baby animal was, baby re'im. Umoshcha de tzavri, the length of his neck was tlosa parsi, was 6 miles long. Ube marbata de reshe, when he lied down on the ground, his head took up an area of parso palga 3 miles. And then he says, Rama Kufta, this brand new baby Re'im, made a diaper. V'sochar leharili Yardena. It caused a clogging up in the river of the Yarden, which, if you see these dimensions and it has to make, yeah, it makes sense. It clogs up the entire Yarden River. That's what the Gemara says the story. So now, a number of Mefarshim weigh in on the story. What does it mean? Rashbam ben Rabbeinu Gershom saying we could explain this Maimer Chazal Kipshutai. It's an actual animal of those dimensions. According to that, if you ever go to Israel, you see that the Yarden River continues to flow. There's no smelly dam that's blocking it. So what's going on? So Rashbam suggests a simple pshat. Over time, the water went through and it diluted it, and it became like all the things that go into the sewer, and they just fall away. So B'meila, the Rashbam seems to imply that it's possible to learn Kipshute. There was such a creature with such large dimensions, and it indeed clogged up the Yarden for a bit.
Maybe it turned into a mountain and went around it.
That's not what he says, but you could have said that too. But the Yarden doesn't have any mountains that are, as far as we know, that are around. There's other explanations, and many explanations say it's all a moshel. It's not a gashmistic. The Ritva writes it's a moshel, that he sees that this is the Rabbi Barchana said, I saw the Munas HaYishmaelim Shekama Mehira Kimat. The Muslim religion grew very quickly. Virama Vagava, which means to say that this animal, it's born, it's already huge. So to the Muslims, they just became a religion and already became a huge, powerful kingdom. Ubitsayosam, and with all their garbage, Kilkilu Hayardin Shu Amunas Yisrael. So the Ritva doesn't get into all the details of the Hartover and the sizes of all that. He just points out that it's a mashal, and some of the details maybe are not so necessary for the nimshal, but the message is that these Muslims, they come and they destroy the world, especially they make tzaras for the Yidden, and that's the remez that the Gemara is trying to say. The Gra has a pshat over here. The Gra says we're talking about a Talmud Chacham. He says the proper Seder Alimud is that someone listens to his Rebbe and he learns Torah, and afterwards he goes in his Meshamish Talmidei Chachamim Mefalpel, and then slowly but surely he learns the Seder Advar. However, someone that changes the Seder and he starts off everything to be mefalpel, to try to make fun of others, to try to show that he's a big chacham and a big machadish. So even the little Torah that he did learn, he loses, because that's not to say that first you have to learn and know things properly, and then you can mix in and give in your opinions. But if you start learning just to give opinions, you're going to lose everything. And he mainly says that's the mashal over here. Urzila bar Yema means a child, a Talmud Chacham that's just starting to learn, and already he wants to become a he wants to become huge. And he wants to be like Har Tover, that we know, coming to the Shmuz now. Har Tover also wanted the Torah should be given on it, so this person wants to be like Har Tover. I want to get it as well. What's the connection? Arba in Parsa. So he says that he wants to say that in one day he's going to go 4 days. I mean, it takes up the average, according to the average of a person's walk a day is 10 parsois. So he's going 40 parsois, meaning to say that he wants to. He doesn't want he wants to within one day to grow 4 days, meaning he's trying to rush himself and go a lot quicker than what's the right way of learning. And he decided that he reached the tachlis, and that's what it says, just like a cloud, shagove tlosa parsi. Meaning that later on the Gemara says that the clouds are 3 parsois above the earth. So he means that when it says that his head's in the clouds, it means that his neck reaches the clouds, meaning he's in his mind, he's at the top of the world already. And he puts his head amongst the Gleilim, that even though people could be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu, that was in the middle of Machne Yisrael, and yet he comes and he thinks he has an opinion and he can argue with them. The Cheshbon of Parso Mechza, the Gemara is in more details. Of Parso Mechza, the Machne Yisrael was 3 parsois, so he means like he's in the middle of just like Moshe was in the middle of the Machne, he wants to be like Moshe in the middle of everything. And when he sees that he cannot win the Talmidei Chachamim, so instead, he starts making them look bad. That's the way of jealousy. When a person can't pick himself up, so he starts throwing dirt at everybody else. That's the end of what the story is. Rama Kufta v'Savar Yarden, Talmidei Chacham are called Yarden, and he's throwing on the Yarden all of his Torah to try to make them look bad. The famous word that the Marash told the Rebbe Rashab and the Razor, that the Seder is not to put somebody else down, to pick yourself up. The Gemara is saying the same idea, that this person, instead of he realizes he can't pick himself up, he's trying to put everybody else down. So this is a very nice beer, or this is in a way more detailed than the Ritzvah. He goes into many of the Pratim, but again, according to these two explanations, this is not an actual creature called Re'im. It was just a marshal for different things. What's an afkemina, what it is? Why is it really negeya if these things are actual bones of animals that existed in the past? Or maybe it's just things that Hashem created as is. So an afkemina can maybe be tumas kelim. What does tumas kelim mean? The Rambam writes that the Torah tells us kol ma'aseh izim, to tell us that kelim that are created from karnaim and tlafayim and atzomei shel izim, from bones or horns of goats, these kelim are mekabel tumah. And the same thing applies if somebody creates a kelim from other bones of other animals, they're mekabel tum. However, the Rambam continues, if they're made from bones of a bird, the posture because it's too weak. Birds are too weak, and their bones are not really lasting. So even if you make a keli out of it, it's not considered a case not mekabel tum. Chutz mikelim asuyim miknafa azniya bilvad ubeitzas hanamis hametzuba. There's a bird called osniya, some kind of a predator bird, that its wings are very powerful, and those bones, you can make a keli out of it. Similarly, an ostrich egg, if it can be decorated, so since these things are stronger, they doiming le'etzem, mekablin tuma kiklei etzem, they are mekabel tuma, just like bones of real animals. Of actual animals. Rambam concludes, however, I think that really it's only metame midrabon. So the Rambam is telling us, bones from an animal are mekabel tumah. Bones from birds are not mekabel tumah unless it's birds that are very strong, and even then it's only mekabel tumah midrabon. And then he says, if it's bones from chaya shebeyam, Over here we say tahir. If the bones come from an animal, this is actually a skeleton of a whale. So whatever is from the ocean, that's tahir and ain't makabel. That's a cloud. Whatever comes from the water is not makabel tumah. It's completely tahir. And even if you take those bones and make them into a keli, it's not going to be makabel tumah. So we have basically three levels. We have animals. Bones of animals are makabel tumah 100%. Bones of birds, it depends. Most birds are not makabel tumah. Some are midrabanan, and anything that goes from the water is not makabel tumah at all. The Rambam concludes another halacha that was as known klei glolim uklei avonim uklei adamo la'olam tahirim. If you take glolim, which glolim is what goes in the bathroom, or stones or earth, and you make them into a keli, these things are going to be tahir no matter what happens. They're like whatever grows in the yam. Where does the Rambam get this from? He gets it from the Mishnah and Kelim. The Mishnah Masechta Kelim Perek Yitzayin, the Mishnah Yadalad, the Mishnah says, Yesh b'masha nivra b'yom harishayin tumah. It goes to the 6 days of creation. What was created on the first day could become tamei. B'asheni on the second day ein bei tumah. B'ashlishi yesh bei tumah. B'ravi b'chamishi ein b'em tumah. Besides knafa oizu beitzas anamis. Rechem Manuri says, why is that different? Because it's basically he says that no knafa is not mekabel tumah. That's the words of the Mishnah. The Bartanura explains whatever is created on the first day, there is tumah because on the first day the earth was created, and you can make clay cheretz, which are makabel tumah. On the second day there's no tumah because the sky was created. There's nothing you make out of sky. On the third day there were trees that were created, and if you make a keli out of wood, that's makabel tumah. On the fourth day, on Wednesday, Hashem created the heaven, the sky, and the stars, and the sun, and the moon, and not the sky, the star, and all the tzva shamayim. There's no tomb. And it continues. Chamishi, what was created on Thursday? Birds and fish. And if you make kelim from them, they're not makabel tumah. Besides, we said the knafa is the beitzas anamis abediyah. Kol shenivra b'yom hashishi tamei, whatever is created on the sixth day is tamei, and that is chayis u'behemis u'shratzim v'adam, chayis and behemis and shratzim, and shratzim would we could say insects or rodents maybe. If a person makes out of their bones, he makes a keli, they are makabel tumah, or from their skin, whatever. The question now is, what is a dinosaur? According to these shittas that these bones come from these things, what is the dinosaur? So the actual word dinosaur, the shirish of the word dinosaur comes from the Latin dinosaurus, which means a terrible lizard. A lizard is a sheretz. A lizard, would be from those creatures that are created on Friday. According to this, if someone takes a dinosaur bone and he makes it into a keli, in that case, the dinosaur bone would be makabel tumah. If it was part of if it was part of an ancient lizard, an ancient sheretz, that would be makabel tumah. Question is that what a dinosaur actually is? So there's actually a use machlekes if birds and if dinosaurs are considered birds or they're a separate species. So this is an article in 1998 which says the debate is over. But as you can imagine, debates are never over. People come with different ideas that dinosaurs are birds, dinosaurs are something else. But if dinosaurs and these are considered birds, in that case, they're not makabel tumah, as we saw, that birds are not makabel tumah unless it's from those stronger birds. Even then, it's makabel tumah midrabban. Another discussion on this subject is the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says the rule is elu sheshartzu min hamayim pardim v'ravim b'beitzim ve'elu shenivru min haaretz pardim v'ravim b'vlad. We know that there are creatures that they lay eggs and there are creatures that give birth to babies directly, which is what we say mammals or the not mammals. So the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says whatever was created from the water they lay eggs. That's like the birds lay eggs. Birds are created from the water. The Torah tells us. Fish obviously also are created from the water. They also lay eggs. Whatever is created from the arets, they give birth. Animals give birth to actual to animals, not to eggs. What do dinosaurs do? Dinosaurs officially laid eggs. That's based on the scientists. Again, we don't know this, but these are pictures of actual dinosaur eggs, and the one on the bottom right, is a picture of a dinosaur egg which can be found inside it. What I said before, there's almost no full skeletons. This is not a full skeleton mamish, but it's an embryo inside the egg, so to speak, what they found. As Kaponim, that's what they say that they found. So those are a nest of eggs, or they put together these eggs that they claim are dinosaur fossil eggs.
So small.
Most dinosaurs are very small. There's the sizes of lizards, of stuff like that. The big ones that you see in pictures and movies, and those are very rare if the Bechal exist in that size. So Akoponim, based on this Birkei Rabbi Eliezer, if something gives eggs, then it's created from the water. If it's created from the water, then it's not Mekabel Tumah. So if it's a lizard, it's Mekabel Tumah. If it's considered in the category of birds and fish, because it's created from, because it relates to eggs, and that would be the case, it would not be Mekabel Tumah. Unless you want to argue that they're very strong bones, just like the ostrich egg and the other one, that it's Mekabel Tumah Midrabban. So the bottom line is, this is just to summarize, if it's a chaya or sheretz, it's makabel tumah min atayr the bones. If it's oifer taninim, it's makabel tumah d'rabbanan maybe, because l'chayra I would say that it's a strong kind of bone. If it's fish, it's not makabel tumah. And what the Rebbe said, if it was created as is, as just a stone, then it's also not makabel tumah. Although on this you can argue that Hashem created it to be a bone of a creature. In that case, it would have the status of that bone, which would either be makabel tumah or not makabel tumah. Just while on the subject, another discussion that people might ask is, what about plastic? Where does plastic come from? Plastic is accepted not to be Mekabel Tumah. Plastic comes from, this is like a whole, I don't understand the picture myself, but basically the assumption is that things decay over time and it goes to the bottom of the ocean floor, turns into gas and oil, and eventually that's what's made into plastic. And some say these things came from basically dinosaurs or other old ancient things, and that would be the case. This whole conversation might have applied to plastic as well. But the pastors, I would say that it's l'chayra a different category, it's a different Indian, and it's not included in the same thing. It's l'chayra so far fresh from the original source that for sure plastic would not be Mekabel Tumah. So that's the answer to the question. The original question we asked in this part is, what are these bones? So first of all, to clarify that there are bones, it's not people making up stuff, that there's no bones out there. So to answer what these bones are, there might have been other animals, that's possible, we spoke about that. There might have been larger animals too, that's also possible. And they might be just bones that Hashem created as is.
What about giants?